The spark of conflict. The pilot's lounge was unlike any space Elijah had ever seen. Its clean, modern lines, comfortable seating, and large glass windows looking out over the busy airport tarmac made it feel like a sanctuary for the most skilled individuals in the aviation world. The hum of conversations, punctuated by the clinking of coffee mugs and the occasional laughter, created a relaxed atmosphere. Elijah could feel the pulse of this world of aviation and professionalism all around him, yet he couldn't shake the sense of being an outsider. It was a feeling he'd grown accustomed to over the years. From the classroom to the flight simulations to the airport itself, Elijah had always known that his path wasn't going to be easy. But sitting there in the pilot's lounge, surrounded by the sleek uniforms and confident chatter of the airline's most experienced pilots, the weight of that knowledge pressed down harder than ever before. He pulled his jacket tighter around his shoulders as he sat up straighter, trying to appear more confident than he felt. The guide who had greeted him earlier told him to wait here while she checked in with some of the senior staff members. Elijah knew this was a rare opportunity, a chance to show that he was not just some kid with a dream, but a young man with the skills and determination to make that dream a reality. His thoughts were interrupted by a voice that cut through the lounge like a blade. "Hey you, what are you doing here?" Elijah froze. The voice came from behind him. He turned to see a woman in a pilot's uniform. She was tall, with sharp features that gave her an air of authority. The gold stripes on her epaulet marked her as a captain, which immediately caught Elijah's attention. But it wasn't her rank or her uniform that made his stomach drop. It was the look in her eyes. Captain Rebecca Whitman's gaze was cold, hard, and entirely dismissive as she approached him. Elijah could sense the tension in the air, thick and palpable. It was as though her mere presence was an unspoken challenge, as if she didn't believe he belonged here. I'm just waiting for my guide," Elijah stammered, his voice betraying the nervousness that was now rising in his chest. Her eyes narrowed, studying him with a mix of suspicion and distaste. "A guest, Don't you know this is a space reserved for actual pilots? You don't belong here." Elijah's heart pounded in his chest. He felt himself shrinking under her gaze. He had been in uncomfortable situations before, but this felt different. This wasn't just an outsider looking in. This was a person with the power to decide whether or not he was worthy of being there. And it was clear that Captain Whitman didn't think he was. I have my guest ID," Elijah said, pulling the small card from his pocket and holding it out. The ID badge was proof of his acceptance into the youth aviation program, a ticket to a world he dreamed of for years. Captain Whitman didn't even glance at the ID. Instead, her lips curled into a tight, almost contemptuous smile. "I don't care what kind of special privileges you think you have. This place is for professionals, not kids who think they can play dress-up in the world of aviation." Elijah's mind raced, the words slicing through him like shards of glass. He had spent years fighting for this moment, working harder than most kids his age, believing that hard work would earn him the respect he deserved. And now, in the place where he had hoped to be embraced, he was being dismissed. A sense of helplessness crept in. He thought of his parents, his teachers, Mr. Thompson, who had believed in him when no one else did. He thought of the hours spent studying aircraft schematics, the late nights writing essays, and the countless hours spent watching documentaries on pilots who had once been where he was, aspiring, dreaming, fighting for their place in a world that didn't always make room for people like them. But here he was, being treated like an intruder. "Get up," Captain Whitman snapped, her voice like ice. "I said this is no place for you. Leave now before I have to get security involved." Elijah froze. For a moment, it felt like his whole world was closing in. He was trapped in a moment of humiliation, the weight of Captain Whitman's words pressing down on him. But then, something inside him shifted. This wasn't the way it was supposed to end. He wouldn't let her define his worth. Not now. Not ever. "I'm not going anywhere," Elijah said, his voice trembling at first, but slowly gaining strength. "I'm here because I've earned the right to be here. This ID," he gestured to his guest badge, "proves it. I've worked harder than you could ever know to get here. And I'm not leaving just because you don't think I belong." For the briefest of moments, Captain Whitman's eyes flickered. Surprise, regret. Elijah couldn't be sure, but it was quickly replaced by a hardening of her features. She squared her shoulders, refusing to back down, and reached for her radio. "I'm calling security," she said flatly. Elijah's stomach turned. This was it. He was about to be kicked out, humiliated in front of everyone. But just as she lifted her radio to her mouth, a voice rang out from the doorway. "Captain Whitman." Both Elijah and the captain turned toward the door. A tall man with broad shoulders and a confident air stepped into the room. Dressed in a well-tailored suit, he exuded authority, and his presence immediately commanded attention. "Is there a problem here?" the man asked, his voice calm but carrying an undeniable weight. Captain Whitman's eyes flicked nervously between the man and Elijah. "This kid," she gestured at Elijah, "is causing trouble. He doesn't belong in the pilot's lounge. I was just about to have security remove him." The man's gaze shifted to Elijah, studying him for a moment. Then he looked back at Captain Whitman with a raised eyebrow. "Captain, this is Elijah Jackson. He's a guest of the Youth Aviation Program. I'm sure you've heard of it." Captain Whitman's face paled slightly, and her mouth opened and closed as though she was struggling to find words. The man stepped forward, extending a hand to Elijah. "I'm Henry Collins, Director of Operations at Horizon Airlines. I'd appreciate it if you could show some respect for the program and its participants, Captain." Elijah's heart skipped a beat. Henry Collins, the Director of Operations. He had no idea how high up this man was, but one thing was certain: he outranked Captain Whitman by a long shot. As the realization sank in, Captain Whitman's cold demeanor faltered. She hesitated for a moment, then muttered a half-hearted apology. "I didn't realize. I'm sorry." The tension in the room was thick, but Henry's calm, collected presence slowly diffused it. "It's all right, Captain," he said, his voice warm but firm. "But let's keep the atmosphere in here professional, shall we?" Elijah's mind was spinning. This wasn't just about a mistake. This was about something much deeper, about the subtle prejudices that lingered in places of power and the assumptions people made based on appearances. Elijah wasn't just some kid. He was someone with a future, someone with dreams. And this man, Henry Collins, had just validated that future by standing up for him. As the tension slowly dissipated, Henry turned to Elijah with a smile. "Don't let this little hiccup discourage you. You're here because you deserve to be." For the first time that day, Elijah felt his shoulders relax. He wasn't alone. Someone somewhere believed in him. And in that moment, Elijah made a silent vow to himself. He would prove everyone who doubted him wrong. The spark of conflict had ignited, but it had also set something else ablaze: his resolve. Elijah was no longer just a dreamer in a lounge full of professionals. He was a force to be reckoned with, and no one, no matter their rank or uniform, was going to stand in his way. A world of opposites. The exchange in the pilot's lounge had been brief, but it felt like an eternity to Elijah. As he stood there, the weight of Captain Whitman's sharp words still hung in the air, but the presence of Henry Collins, the Director of Operations, gave him a sense of relief. He had been defended, even if only for a brief moment, but the fact that someone had stepped in to speak up for him filled him with a renewed sense of purpose. Elijah watched as Henry turned to Captain Whitman one last time. The captain, still clearly flustered, gave a half-hearted nod of apology and quickly excused herself, leaving Elijah standing alone with the director. The door clicked shut behind her, and the air in the lounge seemed to relax, if only slightly. Henry's voice broke the silence, smooth and reassuring, but carrying an undertone of authority. "Are you all right, Elijah?" Elijah looked up, startled by the genuine concern in Henry's eyes. I think so," "I just don't understand why she treated me like that," he said, the frustration bubbling up inside him. "I'm sorry you had to experience that," Henry said softly. Unfortunately, prejudice like that still exists in this industry, and sometimes it rears its ugly head in ways that aren't always obvious at first. But that doesn't mean it's right. You belong here, Elijah. No one can take that away from you. Elijah nodded, but a sinking feeling still lingered in his stomach. The moment had been a jarring reminder that no matter how much he worked, how much he proved himself, there would always be someone ready to dismiss him because of his skin color. It wasn't something he liked to think about, but it was an ever-present reality for him. "I appreciate you stepping in," Elijah said, his voice steady now. I didn't expect that." Henry smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling with a hint of warmth. "It's the least I could do. We've worked hard to build this program, and I want to make sure it's a place where young people like you feel valued. You're not just a kid trying to sneak into the pilot's lounge. You're here because you've earned it." Elijah looked down at his guest ID, the small card that had opened the doors to this world. It didn't feel like much, just a piece of plastic with his name and a barcode. But it represented everything he had worked for, everything he was capable of. He had never felt more determined to prove that he belonged. Henry looked around, as though taking in the surroundings of the lounge one more time. He seemed to be considering something before speaking again. "There's something I think you should know, Elijah. Horizon Airlines is very proud of its youth aviation program, but we're always looking to make it better. We want to give you opportunities to grow, and I think you've got the potential to go far." Henry paused for a moment, as if weighing his next words carefully. "If you're interested, we could use someone like you on our team. Someone with passion and drive. I can't promise anything yet, but how would you like to take the next step?" Elijah felt his breath catch in his throat. The offer was unexpected, and it took a moment for him to process what Henry had just said. This wasn't just a formality. This was a real opportunity. His dreams of becoming a pilot weren't just a distant fantasy anymore. They were within his reach. I don't know what to say," Elijah stammered, feeling the mixture of excitement and disbelief. "You don't have to say anything right now," Henry reassured him. "But think about it. There's a lot of potential for you here. Horizon is looking to mentor the next generation of pilots, and I'd like to see if we can help you get there." Elijah's mind raced. The idea of working with professionals, of being mentored by some of the best in the industry, was beyond anything he had imagined. But the thought of getting so close to the world he'd always dreamed of finally stepping into the cockpit as a professional, was something he could hardly wrap his head around. "Thank you," Elijah finally managed. "I'll definitely think about it. I've always dreamed of being a pilot." Henry clapped him on the shoulder with a reassuring smile. "Good. Keep that fire alive, Elijah. And remember, this industry needs people like you. People who are willing to work hard, push boundaries, and change the way things are done." As Henry started to walk toward the door, he turned back one last time. "Don't let anyone tell you that you don't belong. You're here because you earned it. Don't let anyone forget that." Elijah stood still for a moment, the weight of Henry's words sinking in. He was still trying to process everything that had just happened, the way the entire dynamic in the room had shifted in an instant. What started as a moment of humiliation had transformed into something far more significant, an opportunity. The kind of opportunity that he had fought for, struggled to attain, and dreamed about for years. The door closed behind Henry, and Elijah was left alone in the lounge once more, but this time, he didn't feel like an outsider. He didn't feel like someone who was unwelcome. He sat back in his chair and took a deep breath. The reality of what he was experiencing, this world of aviation, of pilots and captains and airline directors, was no longer just a dream. It was happening. He was here, and he was going to make sure it wasn't just a fleeting moment. Just as he settled back into his seat, the door to the lounge opened again, and this time it wasn't Captain Whitman who stepped inside. A young man in a neatly pressed pilot's uniform entered, carrying a clipboard. He smiled warmly at Elijah, his expression friendly but professional. "Hey there, you must be Elijah, right? I'm Jake, one of the first officers here. I heard you're part of the youth aviation program. I'd love to show you around the facilities and introduce you to some of the team. What do you think?" Elijah's heart skipped a beat. The whirlwind of emotions he had just experienced, humiliation, doubt, then triumph, suddenly gave way to excitement once more. "I'd love that," he said, his voice steady and filled with anticipation. Jake grinned. "Great, follow me. I think you'll be impressed with what you'll see." As Elijah followed Jake out of the lounge, he realized that this was just the beginning. He had a long road ahead of him, and there would be more challenges, more obstacles. But for the first time in a long time, Elijah felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. He wasn't just a kid with a dream anymore. He was a future pilot, and no one, no matter who they were, could take that away from him. The world of aviation had its share of hurdles, but it was his world now, and he was going to make the most of every opportunity it offered. Unseen connections. The soft hum of the jet engines filled the cabin as Elijah and Jake moved through the hangar. The vast expanse of aircraft around them seemed to sparkle in the soft morning light filtering through the large windows. For a moment, Elijah was captivated, his eyes tracing the contours of the planes, imagining the flights they had taken, the thousands of passengers they carried to distant places. Each aircraft told a story, and now he was standing among them, not as an outsider, but as someone who was beginning to carve out his own path. Elijah followed Jake through a series of hallways, the sound of their footsteps echoing the quiet corridors. The walls were adorned with photographs of Horizon Airlines pilots and crews, their faces captured in moments of triumph and camaraderie. It was a history that felt foreign to him, yet deeply familiar, as if he had always been destined to be part of it. "You've got a sharp eye for aviation, Elijah," Jake said, breaking the silence. "I heard about your background. You really know your stuff." Elijah smiled, feeling a flush of pride. "It's something I've always loved. Aviation's been my dream since I was a kid. It's not just the planes. It's everything about how they work, how they're built, and how they connect people. There's something magical about it." Jake glanced at him, a knowing look in his eyes. "I get that. That's the thing about this industry. It's not just a job. It's a passion. And I can tell you've got it." They reached a door at the far end of the corridor, where Jake paused and knocked lightly. There was a brief moment of silence before a voice from inside called out, "Come in." The door swung open, revealing a small office with a wide desk, stacks of paperwork neatly organized in piles, and several framed photos of pilots and flight crews. A man with graying hair and a warm smile looked up from behind the desk. His uniform was impeccable, with the gold stripes of a senior officer gleaming on his shoulders. "Elijah, this is Captain Thomas Grant," Jake introduced. "He's one of our most experienced pilots here at Horizon, and he's agreed to give you a tour of the Flight Operations Department." Captain Grant extended his hand, his grip firm but friendly. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Elijah. I've heard a lot about you." Elijah shook his hand, feeling the weight of the captain's presence. "Thank you, sir. It's an honor to be here." Grant gestured toward the seats across from his desk, inviting Elijah to sit. "Please, have a seat. I hear you're eager to learn, and we're happy to share whatever knowledge we can." As Elijah sat down, the reality of the situation began to sink in. He was sitting in a room with seasoned professionals, people who had spent decades in the industry. They had seen everything, from technical challenges to the ever-evolving demands of aviation. And now, they were offering him a chance to learn, to grow, and to contribute. It was more than he had ever dreamed of. "Jake tells me you've got quite the aptitude for aviation," Captain Grant continued, his eyes narrowing with curiosity. "I'm curious, Elijah, what is it that excites you the most about flying?" Elijah thought for a moment, choosing his words carefully. I think it's the sense of freedom. I've always been fascinated by how a plane can take off, soar through the clouds, and travel thousands of miles. It's a feeling of control, but also of trust. Trust in the aircraft, the crew, and the process. Every flight is like a story, and I want to be a part of that. Grant nodded thoughtfully, clearly impressed by Elijah's insight. You're absolutely right. Flying is as much about the people as it is about the technology. We rely on our crew, our training, and our instincts to ensure that everything goes smoothly. It's not just about knowing how to fly the plane. It's about understanding the bigger picture, the operations, the safety protocols, the teamwork that goes into every single flight. Elijah's eyes widened as he absorbed Captain Grant's words. He had always thought of aviation in terms of the individual pilot, the one person in the cockpit who controlled the flight. But now he was beginning to see the complexity of the industry as a whole, the many interconnected roles that made every flight a success. Grant leaned forward slightly, his tone shifting to one of mentorship. I want to show you something. We got a training simulator down the hall. It's where we conduct our emergency drills and practice specific flight scenarios. I think you'd benefit from seeing it in action. Elijah nodded eagerly. I'd love to. As they made their way down another long corridor, Captain Grant explained the inner workings of the training facility. The simulator was a high-tech machine that replicated every aspect of a flight, from takeoff to landing, including turbulence, engine failure, and sudden weather changes. It was designed to prepare pilots for any scenario, ensuring that they could respond quickly and effectively in real-life situations. They entered a room filled with the hum of computers and flashing lights. The simulator itself stood in the center, a cockpit mock-up with multiple screens and buttons, all programmed to simulate the experience of flying an actual aircraft. Elijah could hardly contain his excitement. He had read about simulators in textbooks and seen them in videos, but this was his first time seeing one up close. Captain Grant gestured to the seat in front of the simulator. This is where the magic happens. It's not just about flying. It's about decision-making, problem-solving, and staying calm under pressure. When you're in the air, there's no room for panic. You need to think fast, assess the situation, and execute your training. Elijah stepped closer, his fingers hovering over the buttons, his heart racing with anticipation. He could already picture himself sitting in that seat, controlling the aircraft, making the decisions that would shape the flight's outcome. But as he stood there, something unexpected happened. A voice from the doorway interrupted his thoughts. Elijah, I was wondering if I could steal you for a moment. Elijah turned around to see Henry Collins, the director of operations, standing in the doorway. His expression was friendly but serious. There's someone here who wants to meet you. Elijah's heart skipped a beat. He had just begun to immerse himself in this world. And now, it seemed like something else was about to happen. Grant smiled and gestured for Elijah to follow. Go ahead. I'm sure whatever it is can wait a few minutes. As Elijah followed Henry down the hallway, he couldn't help but wonder who could be waiting for him. The possibilities filled him with curiosity and excitement. Was it another mentor? A new opportunity? Or perhaps someone who could help him take the next step in his journey? They turned a corner, and as they approached a conference room, Elijah caught a glimpse of someone he hadn't expected. His father, Richard Jackson, the Federal Aviation Administration administrator. Elijah froze, a mix of surprise and confusion flooding his chest. What was his father doing here? He hadn't expected to see him at the airport, let alone in a setting like this. Richard Jackson was a powerful figure in aviation, and seeing him standing there, looking at his son with an approving smile, left Elijah speechless. Henry glanced at Elijah, recognizing his shock. Elijah, meet your father. He's the one who helped make this entire youth aviation program possible. Without his support, none of this would exist. Elijah's mind raced. His father, the FAA administrator, the man who had worked tirelessly to shape aviation regulations and policy, was the reason he was here. the reason all of this was possible. His father reached out and pulled him into a hug, his voice filled with warmth and pride. "I've been following your progress, son. I'm proud of you. You've got a bright future ahead of you." Elijah stood still for a moment, overwhelmed by the realization that his entire world had just shifted. He had never imagined that his father, the one person who had always been there to guide him, would play such a significant role in his journey into aviation. "Dad," Elijah finally said, his voice trembling slightly, "I had no idea. I didn't know you were involved in this." Richard Jackson chuckled softly. "It's not something I often talk about, but I wanted you to experience this world on your own terms, not just because of my position. You've earned every step of the way, Elijah. And this is just the beginning." As Elijah looked around at the faces in the room, Jake, Captain Grant, Henry, and now his father, he realized that this moment was more than just a dream. It was his reality. And the world of aviation had just opened its doors to him in ways he never could have imagined. This was his time, his future. And no one, no matter their doubts or prejudices, could take that away from him. The storm that shook the skies. Elijah's mind was still spinning as he stood in the conference room, his father's presence offering both comfort and a reminder of the immense legacy that he was beginning to step into. The future ahead of him seemed vast, like the boundless sky that had always fascinated him. The people around him had offered him a glimpse of that future, a future where he could make a difference, where his passion for aviation could turn into something real. Yet, it also felt like he was teetering on the edge of something he could barely comprehend, like the very wings of a plane that hadn't yet taken flight. As his father, Richard Jackson, spoke to the small group gathered around them, Elijah's gaze drifted to the window. Outside, the morning sun had climbed higher into the sky, casting light over the expansive airport below. The planes on the tarmac were like small giants, poised to leap into the air. It was as if the world of aviation was waiting for him to claim his place within it. "Son," Richard said, his voice drawing Elijah back to the conversation, "I know this journey hasn't been easy. I know you faced challenges because of your background, because of who you are. But you've never let that stop you, and I respect that more than anything." Elijah nodded, his throat tight with emotion. He had always known that his father believed in him, but hearing those words from him, in this moment, made everything feel so much more real. He was a part of something bigger now, not just because of his father's position, but because he had earned it on his own merits. Jake, Captain Grant, and Henry were quietly listening to the conversation, offering the occasional nod or a smile of encouragement. The air in the room was thick with anticipation. It was as if everyone could sense that Elijah's life was about to change in a profound way. Suddenly, the door swung open with a soft creak, and a new figure entered the room. It was a woman, tall and with an air of authority that immediately commanded attention. She was dressed in a sharp uniform, her dark hair pulled back into a neat bun, and her gaze was intense as she swept the room. Captain Rebecca Whitman. Elijah's stomach clenched at the sight of her, though he couldn't quite pinpoint why. Her demeanor was stern, almost cold, and there was something about her presence that made him uneasy. He had heard about her. Captain Whitman was one of Horizon Airlines' most respected and experienced pilots, known for her meticulous attention to detail and no-nonsense approach to her work. But Elijah couldn't forget the memory of their first meeting in the pilot's lounge, when she had treated him as if he were nothing more than an intruder, an unwanted presence in a space that she believed was off-limits to someone like him. "Elijah," Richard said, breaking the silence and standing to greet Captain Whitman. "I'm glad you could join us." Captain Whitman nodded curtly, her eyes scanning Elijah as if evaluating him. "Mr. Jackson," she replied, her tone cool but respectful. "I hear your son is showing promise in the aviation field. It's rare to see someone so young with such drive." Elijah felt a rush of pride, but also a pang of nervousness. He knew what had happened before, the tension between them when Captain Whitman had called security on him. That moment still burned in his mind, and though he wanted to prove her wrong, he couldn't shake the feeling that her view of him hadn't changed. "Well, Captain," Elijah said, trying to keep his voice steady, "I'm learning as much as I can. It's a long road ahead." Whitman tilted her head slightly, a flicker of recognition in her eyes, but it quickly vanished. "Indeed, aviation is not for the faint of heart." She paused for a moment, then turned to his father. "I was just reviewing the flight schedules for Horizon, and I noticed something I thought you should be aware of." Richard raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What's that?" "We're expecting a full flight load tomorrow, and with the weather conditions forecasted, I'm concerned about the potential for turbulence. I've seen planes struggle with that kind of weather, and it's something we need to prepare for," Whitman explained. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge of authority in her words. "I'll make sure we have additional resources ready," Richard replied, nodding thoughtfully. "Thanks for the heads up." As the conversation shifted to more technical matters, Elijah stood quietly, taking in the dynamics around him. It was clear that Captain Whitman was a force to be reckoned with in the aviation world. She had years of experience, a sharp mind, and a reputation that demanded respect. But Elijah couldn't help but wonder if there was more to her cold exterior than met the eye. A few minutes later, the conversation shifted back to him. "Elijah," Jake said, "I think you're ready for your next challenge." Elijah looked up, his curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" "You've got the fundamentals down," Captain Grant added. "It's time to move from theory to practice. I've arranged for you to take a seat in the cockpit during a real flight. It's going to be a short route, just a few hours, but it'll give you a chance to see the operation from the inside." Elijah's heart skipped a beat. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the opportunity to sit in the cockpit of an actual flight, to be surrounded by the complex instruments and controls he had studied for years. It was a dream come true. But just as he was about to respond, the room seemed to shake with a sudden, unexpected intensity. The lights flickered overhead, and a low hum vibrated through the walls. For a brief moment, everything seemed to freeze. The air grew thick with tension as everyone turned toward the window. Outside, the sky had turned an ominous shade of gray. The gentle breeze had shifted into something much stronger, causing the trees outside to sway violently. The temperature in the room dropped slightly, and Elijah could feel a sudden knot in his stomach. Something wasn't right. The phone on the desk buzzed loudly, breaking the silence. Richard answered it quickly, his face going pale as he listened to the voice on the other end. "What's happening?" he asked, his voice sharp with concern. "I thought we had more time." He hung up the phone and turned to the group, his expression grim. "There's been a sudden storm front moving in faster than expected. They're reporting severe turbulence in the area. It's going to affect the entire flight schedule for the day." Captain Whitman's face hardened. "I'll make the necessary adjustments," she said. "We've got a lot of ground to cover." Jake stood, his expression serious. "Elijah, I think you need to go with Captain Whitman. We've got some decisions to make, and this storm could be the perfect opportunity for you to see how pilots handle real-world challenges." Elijah nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. He had never been so close to being a part of something so critical. The storm outside felt like an omen, a reminder that in aviation, as in life, things could change in an instant. But for Elijah, this was more than just a chance to prove himself. This was a test of everything he had learned so far. Captain Whitman turned to lead the way, her posture resolute as she stepped toward the door. Elijah followed, his mind racing with the realization that the storm was not just outside. It was now a part of his journey, a challenge he had to face head-on, just like the turbulent skies that awaited him. As the door closed behind them, Elijah felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. He was about to experience what it meant to fly, not just as a student, but as someone who was beginning to understand the true weight of the responsibility that came with it. The storm outside was just the beginning. A dreamer's reality. Elijah Jackson's fascination with aviation began long before he could remember. His earliest memory was as a small child, barely 5 years old, gazing out of his bedroom window with wonder at the planes soaring high above the city. Their engines hummed like a distant lullaby, and the white contrails they left behind were like lines in the sky that connected the earth to the heavens. To Elijah, these planes weren't just machines. They were symbols of freedom, of movement, and of possibility. They represented a world far beyond his small neighborhood, a world where anything seemed possible. He was the son of working-class parents, and though they encouraged his curiosity, their lives were centered on the daily grind. His father, a dedicated public transportation worker, had instilled in him the value of hard work and perseverance. His mother, a schoolteacher, showed him that knowledge was power, that an open mind was one of the best tools anyone could possess. But for Elijah, it was the sky that captured his imagination and shaped his future. At first, his dreams seemed like just that, something unattainable, a mere wish made late at night before he drifted to sleep. But as the years passed, Elijah realized that his dreams could be more than just fantasy. They could be a future. He began reading everything he could get his hands on about aviation, the history of flight, the mechanics of aircraft, the lives of pilots, both commercial and military. He even found a mentor in Mr. Thompson, his high school science teacher, who shared Elijah's passion for flight. Mr. Thompson would often lend him old aviation magazines, letting him pore over the detailed blueprints and photographs of planes that filled their pages. By the time Elijah was in high school, he had already become a walking encyclopedia of all things aviation. He could name every model of plane that flew at the local airport, often identifying them by the sound of their engines before they even came into view. He could sketch out the schematics of an airplane's cockpit, explaining how every button, dial, and lever worked in harmony to guide the aircraft safely through the skies. His friends were often in awe of his knowledge, but they also teased him about his obsession. "You're gonna fly for NASA one day, huh?" They'd joke, and while they laughed, Elijah's heart swelled with pride at the thought. However, being a black teenager in a predominantly white community meant that Elijah's dreams were often met with skepticism. It wasn't that people outright told him he couldn't achieve his goals. It was more subtle than that. He often felt like an outsider, like his aspirations were too far-fetched for someone like him. When he talked about becoming a pilot or working in the aviation industry, the responses ranged from polite indifference to barely veiled doubt. His classmates, while friendly, didn't understand why he spent so much time reading technical manuals or staring at planes. And while his teachers were supportive, the lack of diversity in the aviation field meant that he rarely saw people who looked like him in the role of pilots or engineers. Despite these challenges, Elijah's passion never wavered. Instead, it drove him harder. He understood that the aviation industry was a tough one to break into, especially for someone who wasn't from a privileged background. But he wasn't interested in being just another dreamer. Elijah wanted to make a difference, to prove that his passion for flight wasn't a phase or an unrealistic fantasy. It was his future, his calling, and no matter what anyone else thought, he was going to make it happen. When the youth aviation program was announced, Elijah knew this was his opportunity. The program was an incredibly selective initiative that gave a select few high school students the chance to meet with industry professionals, tour aviation facilities, and even take part in flight simulations. But it wasn't just about the chance to sit in a simulator. It was about proving to himself and to the world that he belonged in this field. This was his chance to get his foot in the door, to show that he had the knowledge and the drive to succeed. The application process was rigorous, requiring applicants to submit an essay about their passion for aviation, their aspirations, and why they felt they deserved a spot in the program. Elijah spent weeks crafting the perfect essay, pouring his heart and soul into every word. He wrote about the first time he saw a plane take off from the local airport and how the roar of the engines had filled him with awe. He wrote about his late-night study sessions, poring over aviation textbooks, and his desire to one day become a pilot who would inspire other young people like him. And above all, He wrote about his unwavering belief that anyone, regardless of their background or race, could achieve their dreams if they worked hard enough. When the acceptance letter finally arrived, Elijah could hardly believe it. He had been chosen as one of the few students to take part in the youth aviation program. He had worked so hard, and now it felt like his dreams were becoming a reality. He was no longer just a teenager with a fascination for planes. He was a part of something much bigger, an opportunity to connect with people who shared his passion and to learn from those who had already made their mark in the aviation world. Elijah's excitement was palpable. He had spent the entire week before the event preparing. He polished his best suit, made sure his guest ID badge was secure, and reread every piece of material the program had sent. He wanted to be fully prepared, to show everyone there that he was serious about his dreams and that he had earned his place. His parents were incredibly proud, even though they didn't fully understand the extent of Elijah's passion. They knew how hard their son had worked to get to this point, and they supported him wholeheartedly. The day of the event arrived, and Elijah could hardly contain his excitement. He stood in front of the mirror that morning, adjusting his tie, checking his guest ID once again. He felt a surge of nervousness in his chest, but it was the good kind. The kind that came when you knew you were about to embark on something life-changing. He was on his way to the airport, a place that had always been filled with mystery and wonder for him. And this time, he wasn't just visiting. He was part of the world that existed behind the gates, a world that had always seemed out of reach. The day was bright and clear, the sun casting a warm glow over the runway as Elijah arrived at Horizon Airlines headquarters. His heart skipped a beat as he passed through the gates and entered the building. The lobby was sleek and modern, with high ceilings and walls adorned with photos of airplanes and pilots. It felt like he had stepped into a different world, one that was filled with endless possibilities. He was greeted by one of the event coordinators, a woman who immediately made him feel at ease. She was friendly, explaining the itinerary for the day and introducing him to a few of the other students who had been selected for the program. Elijah was amazed by how accomplished everyone seemed. Some of the other students had been attending aviation camps for years, while others were part of high school flight clubs. Elijah felt a little out of place at first, but he reminded himself that he had earned his spot here just like everyone else. As they walked through the halls of the facility, Elijah couldn't help but be in awe of the technology and the history around him. He saw flight simulators, engineering workshops, and rooms filled with the latest in aviation technology. He was in the presence of greatness, surrounded by professionals who had spent their lives in the sky. But it was when they reached the pilot's lounge that Elijah truly felt like he was part of something incredible. The lounge was a spacious, elegant room, reserved exclusively for the pilots of Horizon Airlines. Large windows provided a view of the runway, and the walls were lined with photographs of legendary pilots. Elijah could hardly believe he was standing in this room. He felt like he had stepped into the heart of the aviation world, and for a moment, it was as though everything else faded away. He sat down in one of the comfortable chairs, feeling the weight of the moment settle over him. This wasn't just any lounge. This was a place where the men and women who flew the planes that carried thousands of people around the world gathered to relax, to plan, to discuss. And for a brief moment, Elijah felt as though he belonged there too. It was only a small, quiet victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. Elijah had made it to the pilot's lounge, and as he sat there, he couldn't help but think that this was only the beginning.